My name is Chloe Bell. I'm 29 years old. And on my wedding day, my father stood up in the middle of the ceremony and said one sentence that made everything stop. The church was full. Friends. Relatives. James Reed's family was seated on the right. My family was on the left. I was standing at the altar beside James. A white dress. Flowers. The music had already faded. The priest opened the book and said the traditional words. If anyone knows of any reason why this marriage should not take place, speak now. Usually, no one says anything after that line. It is just a tradition. A formality. The priest was already about to continue the ceremony. And at that moment, I heard movement. Someone stood up. I turned my head. It was my father. William Bell. At first, I thought he was just adjusting his jacket. But he did not sit back down. He was looking straight at James. The church became so quiet that I heard someone drop the ceremony program. The priest frowned. "Sir?" My father said calmly. "This marriage should not take place." A quiet whisper moved through the room. I felt James's hand tighten slightly around mine. "Dad," I said quietly. But he did not even look at me. He kept staring at my fiancé. And added, "Because this man is lying to my daughter." All eyes turned to James Reed. I slowly turned toward him. He was no longer smiling. For a second, I saw an expression on his face that I had never seen before. Tension. "This is absurd," James said quietly. The guests began whispering. Someone stood up. Someone tried to calm people down. I took a step forward. "Dad, what is going on?" But before he could answer, something happened that I absolutely did not expect. Another figure suddenly rose from among the guests. It was my best friend. And when she stood up, I saw tears running down her face. And a second later, she turned and ran out of the church. For a few seconds, no one moved. Everyone was looking at the door my friend had just run through. Her name was Emily Carter. We had been friends for almost 10 years. She had been beside me during the most important moments of my life. And today she was supposed to be standing beside me at the altar. But instead, she ran out of the church. Crying. I stood there between my father and James. And suddenly realized that I could no longer hear what the guests were saying. All the sounds had become muffled. I looked at James. He looked tense. But not surprised. And that was strange. I turned to my father. "Dad, wait." Then I looked at the priest. "I need to step outside for a minute." He nodded, confused. I lifted my dress and quickly walked toward the door. When I stepped out of the church, the fresh air hit my face. Emily was standing by the stone steps. She was leaning against the railing with both hands. And she was still crying. "Emily?" She turned around. Her eyes were red. "Chloe." I walked closer. "What is going on?" She shook her head. "I shouldn't have come." "What?" She covered her face with her hands. I thought I would be able to just get through it. I did not understand anything. "Emily, what are you talking about?" She took a deep breath. And looked at me as if she were about to say something very heavy. "I should have told you earlier." I felt everything inside me tighten. "Told me what?" She looked back toward the church. Then at me again. And quietly said, "I'm in love with James." The world around me seemed to stop. I stared at her. Not understanding. She quickly added, "I didn't want to ruin anything. I swear. I thought it would just pass." I said nothing. She kept talking. "But when your father stopped the wedding." She started crying again. I realized I couldn't stand there anymore and pretend. I looked at her and tried to process her words. "My best friend. And my fiancé." I quietly asked, "Does James know?" She lowered her eyes. And answered, "No." Then she added almost in a whisper, "At least. I don't think he does." I stood there for several seconds. Then I turned toward the church door. Because in that moment, I suddenly understood one thing. If my father stopped the wedding, then he knew something else. And maybe that was why James had looked so tense. When I returned to the church, people were still whispering quietly. Some were standing. Some were sitting, but no one was smiling anymore. The priest was standing at the altar, clearly unsure whether the ceremony would continue. My father was still standing in the same place, beside my mother. James was standing at the altar. His face had grown harder. When I walked up, he asked quietly, "What happened?" I looked at him for several seconds, but I said nothing. Then I turned to my father. "Dad," I said calmly, "you said James is lying." He nodded. The church became quiet again. Everyone was listening. "Explain," I said. James cut in sharply. "Chloe, we don't need to do this here." I looked at him. "Then say it yourself." He opened his mouth, but did not answer. My father stepped forward. I looked into his company. James smirked. "Seriously?" My father ignored him. I checked the financial reports, and I found something interesting. The guests started whispering again. James looked at me. "Chloe, this is ridiculous." But his voice no longer sounded confident. My father continued. "His company owes the bank several $1 million. A quiet wave of noise moved through the room. James said sharply, "These are temporary financial difficulties." My father answered calmly, "That's called bankruptcy." James took a step toward me. "Chloe, listen." But my father did not stop. And that's not even the most interesting part. He looked straight at James. "The most interesting part is that all these debts appeared about a year and a half ago." I felt everything inside me tighten. A year and a half. That was almost exactly when James had proposed to me. My father continued. "And that is exactly when he began actively discussing." He paused. "Your family's investments." The church grew even quieter. James said sharply, "That's a lie." But his voice already sounded different. Not confident. Just tense. I looked at him. And for the first time that morning, I felt that something inside me was beginning to fall into place. But there was still one thing I did not understand. If this was true, then why had James never told me about it? I was standing between my father and James. And in that moment, the church suddenly became very quiet. So quiet that I could hear someone in the last row carefully moving a chair. James took a step toward me. "Chloe," he said quietly. "This is not what it looks like." I looked at him. Calmly. "Then explain." He ran a hand over his face. "Every company has difficulties." My father let out a quiet laugh. "Several million in debt is not difficulties." James turned sharply toward him. "You don't understand how business works." "I understand enough," my father answered calmly. James looked at me again. "Chloe, we talked about investments. That's normal. Couples build a future together." I slowly nodded. "Yes. They do." I paused slightly and asked one simple question. "Then why did you never tell me about the debt?" He fell silent. Just for a second. But that second was enough. "I didn't want to worry you," he finally said. I looked at him. "Worry me?" He started speaking faster. "I was going to solve everything. I was almost done negotiating with investors." My father said quietly, "You are going to pay off your debts with her money." James turned sharply. "That's not true. I never asked her for money." My father answered calmly. "No. You just kept talking about how her family owns an investment fund." James clenched his jaw. That was conversation. Normal conversation. I was still looking at him. And suddenly I remembered one strange detail. Several months earlier, we were having dinner. And James had said a sentence that had sounded ordinary back then. But now it sounded different. He had said. After the wedding, it'll be easier for us to make financial decisions together. Back then, I hadn't thought much of it. But now that sentence sounded completely different. I took a slow breath. And suddenly asked one more question. James. He looked at me. If my father had said nothing today, would you have told me about the debt? He opened his mouth, but did not answer. And in that exact moment, I noticed something for the first time. Emily. My friend. She was standing by the church door. And looking at James. As if she knew the answer to that question. I turned toward the door. Emily was still standing there. She looked as if she was hesitating whether to leave or stay. James noticed her too. And in that moment, I saw something strange. For a second, their eyes met. And it was not an ordinary look. It was the look of people who already understand each other without words. I slowly turned back to James. You didn't answer my question. He ran a hand through his hair. Chloe, this is not the time to discuss this in front of everyone. I nodded. Interesting. Because somehow there was time to get married in front of everyone. A quiet rustle moved through the church again. James stepped closer. We'll talk at home. Calmly. I looked at him. No. He frowned. What do you mean, no? I turned toward the door. Emily. She froze. Several guests turned around too. Come here. She slowly walked over. James visibly tensed. When she stopped beside us, I calmly said. Outside, just now, you told me something. Emily lowered her eyes. James frowned. What are you talking about? I looked directly at her. Say it again. She shook her head. Chloe. Please. She closed her eyes for a second. Then looked at James. And quietly said. I told Chloe that I'm in love with you. The church became so quiet that it felt as if people had stopped breathing. James turned sharply toward her. Emily, what are you doing? She looked at him. And for the first time, anger appeared in her eyes. I don't want to lie anymore. I shifted my gaze from her to James. He looked like he was trying to come up with an explanation as fast as possible. Chloe, this is absurd. She's just confused. Emily said sharply. No. He looked at her. Be quiet. But she did not stay quiet. She looked at me. I tried to stay away. I really did. But he was the one who started texting me. James said sharply. That's a lie. But his voice sounded different now. Emily said quietly. Do you remember the evening after your birthday? He did not answer. And that was enough. I felt a strange calm. As if everything inside me had suddenly become clear. I slowly looked at James. You told me that evening you were meeting with investors. He was silent. Emily added quietly. He was with me. And in that moment, I finally understood one thing. This wedding had to be stopped. But not for the reason my father had given. After Emily's words, silence fell over the church. The kind of silence in which you can hear people stop whispering. James was standing in front of me. And for the first time the entire day, he did not look confident. He looked irritated. This is absurd, he said sharply. Emily gave a bitter smile. Really? He turned toward her. You're ruining a wedding right now. With your fantasies. She shook her head. No. I'm just telling the truth. He stepped closer. We texted. So what? That means nothing. Emily said quietly. You told me Chloe would find out after the wedding anyway. I looked at him. James turned sharply toward her. You're twisting everything. She gave a dry laugh. Really? Do you want me to show the messages? Whispers rose through the church again. James stepped toward me. Chloe. Listen. This is all emotion. I asked calmly. Were you seeing her? He stayed silent. Just answer me. He let out a heavy breath. It happened once. Emily laughed quietly. 3 times. James snapped. Be quiet. But she was already looking at me. He told me he was marrying you because it was the right thing to do. I said nothing. She continued. And with me, he feels free. James tried to cut her off. Emily. But she was no longer stopping. He said that after the wedding, everything would be easier. At that moment, my father said quietly. Easier? James turned toward him. And suddenly said something he probably should never have said out loud. Yes. Because her family can solve my problems. Several guests gasped. He realized he had said it aloud. But it was already too late. I looked at him. And for the first time that morning, I felt not pain, but clarity. I slowly took off my ring. James froze. Chloe. But I was already holding the ring out to him. The wedding is off. He looked at me as if he still hoped I would change my mind. But I already knew one thing. This morning was always meant to end this way. And in that moment, I suddenly understood one strange detail. My father stopped the wedding because of money. But in reality, he had accidentally saved me from a much bigger mistake.